The first thing you might notice as you step back into the world of ancient Egypt, perhaps around 1350 BCE, is how familiar some things feel, and how astonishingly inconvenient others are. You are standing in the courtyard of a modest house, made of sun-baked mud bricks. The Nile is only a short walk away, its waters glimmering with a soft haze of evening. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, and with it, the intense desert heat begins to soften, replaced by a cooler, whispering air. The walls around you are built with practical hand-stick, irregular, and designed to retain as much coolness as possible. They have no paint, no grandeur, but they do the job. The sleeping arrangements, however, are not what you might expect. Most Egyptians, especially those in the working classes, did not sleep in separate bedrooms. In fact, the idea of a bedroom, as we know it, simply didn't exist for most of them. They slept where they could, when they could, on rooftops under the stars in the summer months, or on woven reed mats in shared rooms during colder spells. It wasn't so much about personal space as it was about airflow and shade. Berth the rooftop, high above the scent of donkeys and fish bones, was prized real estate on a warm night. Some households had sleeping platforms raised, wooden frames perhaps 1 foot off the ground. These helped reduce the chance of being bitten by insects or scorpions. These platforms were sometimes made of palm wood, and more rarely of imported cedar for wealthier families. The mattress consisted of tightly bound bundles of papyrus reeds or straw. Comfort was not the point. The idea was ventilation, protection, and rest. Pillows, if they existed at all, were not fluffy. You may imagine a soft cotton pillow cradling the head, but in this world, a headrest made of carved wood or stone was more typical. These semicircular supports, just enough to hold the head aloft, served a dual purpose: to reduce neck, preserve elaborate hairstyles. For the living, comfort came second to ritual and order. You might hear a family reciting prayers to Base, the dwarf god of sleep, protection, and domestic harmony. In homes of all sizes, he was invoked with faint murmurings before bed, painted on walls, or etched into amulets dangling over cribs. If you listened closely, you'd hear names of protective spells or hymns passed down orally, small rituals to soothe the spirit into sleep. And what of privacy? It didn't matter. The concept was alien. Families, extended relatives, sometimes even workers or distant cousins, shared small spaces. Sleep was communal. Quiet came not from solitude, but from routine. You learned to ignore snoring, whispering, the mewing of cats beneath the straw roof. It was part of life. Now shift your gaze to a richer household, perhaps, a high-ranking scribe, or a temple overseer. Here, things look subtly more comfortable. Rooms are larger, decorated with painted lotus flowers and symbolic murals. Brisk breeze wafts through fine linen curtains. The bed frame is still wooden, but it's polished, curved, and elevated. Fine reed mats are covered with linen sheets, and in some cases, imported wool from Cyprus. Servants may enter the room with oil lamps, the flames flickering behind translucent alabaster covers. A bowl of water sits nearby for foot washing, and next to it perhaps a small dish of dried figs or honeyed dates in case of night hunger. But even in these upper tiers of society, sleep remained functional. No bedtime novels, no blankets, unless the night was unusually cold. People retired when the day's tasks ended, and the oil lamps were used sparingly, too costly for indulgence. The household's waking and sleeping rhythm mirrored the sun, not the individual's desires. What about the noise? A modern sleeper might be shocked. Dogs barked. Frogs croaked loudly along the Nile's banks. Workers sang long into the night after feast days. Ritual drumming could echo from temples on festival nights, and crocodiles occasionally bellowed from the water's edge. The city of Thebes never truly slept, and yet its people found rest within it. That rest was structured not only by daily labor, but also by cosmic automat, the principle of harmony and balance. Even sleep had its place in the great equilibrium. By morning, the routine would start again, washing with cold water, rubbing skin with natron salt, tying linen kilts, and lighting incense for the household gods. And here we might wonder, if sleep was so essential, why were dreams so deeply distrusted? The sleep, for the ancient Egyptians, was not merely a physical necessity. It was also a romancing, unpredictable, and occasionally untrustworthy. To lie down and close your eyes was to drift into a space where the ordinary rules no longer apply, and where things both sacred and sinister might intrude upon your rest in this dim twilight world. Dreams were not, as modern psychology might suggest, the mere detritus of the subconscious. They were messages, clear, mysterious, divine, or malicious, depending on the source. The gods sent visions, as did spirits, ancestors, or, sometimes, more malevolent beings. To dream was to be contacted. The only real question was, by whom? You might wake in your mud-brick courtyard under the early morning sun, disturbed and unsure. The night had been filled with the image of a falcon flying backward, or a crocodile walking on two legs. You wouldn't simply shrug and make coffee. Instead, you'd recount your dream to the household's wise one, or walk to the local temple complex where dream interpreters, trained in deciphering such nocturnal puzzles, awaited. These interpreters used dream books, collections of symbols, signs, and their recorded meanings, written in hieratic script on papyrus scrolls. One such artifact, the Chester Beatty Dream Book, compiled around 1275 BCE, offers a glimpse into this process. According to its logic, to dream of drinking warm beer was good. To see oneself eating crocodile meat, very bad. A man seeing himself walking backwards, that meant he'd be returning from exile. Symbol met pattern. It was a kind of divine bureaucracy, and it had to be managed. It wasn't just priests who used dream books. Ordinary literate Egyptians did too, and even some illiterate ones relied on these records being read aloud. The goal was not interpretation for curiosity's sake, but rather practical action. If a dream was bad, it needed to be neutralized. And here is where it gets sleepier and more complicated. A bad dream might be blamed on a demon of the night, not always monstrous in form. These entities could be mere disruptors, stealers of rest, twisters of dreams. They entered through unguarded spiritual doorways, which could include unwashed feet, an unspoken bedtime prayer, or a household amulet. Left unpolished, you could protect yourself with charms, small figurines of protective deities like Base or Tauret, placed beneath the headrest. Some Egyptians even wrote out protective spells on linen and tied them around their upper arms before sleep. Children, especially, were thought to be vulnerable. Parents would hang ivory wands engraved with apotropaic creatures, part lion, part hippopotamus near the child's sleeping mat. Even lullabies carried echoes of magical protection, often invoking gods, not to bring peace, but to keep other things away. And yet, sleep was also the realm of contact with the dead. Families might deliberately attempt to incubate dreams, to seek visions of departed loved ones, usually in the hope of obtaining advice, reconciliation, or even justice. These letters to the dead were sometimes written on bowls or linen, and buried in tombs. In a culture where ancestor worship remained deeply woven into daily life, a dream could be a visitation, a reminder, or an unresolved plea. If one slept badly or dreamed poorly, it might be more than psychological. It might be a social warning that you had failed to honor your obligations, your household gods, or your lineage. Still, even with all this spiritual significance, the Egyptians remained deeply practical. Their physicians, who often doubled as priests, kept sleep recipes and remedies. These included crushed herbs mixed with beer or wine, small cakes made with poppy or blue lotus, and ritual washes infused with frankincense. In more severe cases, temple sleep was prescribed. Temple sleep, also known as incubation, was a formal process. The sleeper would fast, bathe in sacred water, and lie on a straw mat in a dedicated sanctuary. The goal: to receive a dream from a healing god, most often Imhotep, the architect and deified physician. If the dream came, it was recorded. If healing occurred, an offering was made. If not, more fasting, more prayer. In practice, this may have resembled something between medical care and guided meditation. The ambient sounds of water features, the warmth of the sandstone walls, the hush of linen robes brushing past. The temple sleep experience may have provided, if nothing else, an atmosphere of peace. And that, too, could bring healing. But despite their spiritual caution, Egyptians were not uniformly fearful about sleep. Many songs, poems, and fragments from tombs speak of rest in affectionate tones. One ancient love poem likens the beloved's arrival to the coolness of sleep at midday. In death, the field of reeds was imagined not only as a place of farming and leisure, but as one where rest came without interruption. Yet perhaps the most curious thing about Egyptian sleep culture is what it tells us about how they understood consciousness. To sleep was to dip into another realm, not a complete departure from waking life, but a hazy borderland where the rules details could blur. This may explain why some tombs depict the deceased asleep in their sarcophagus, not dead, but dreaming eternally. For the Egyptians, perhaps there was no sharp line between wakefulness, sleep, and death, only shifts in awareness, all governed by the same cosmic balance. But if sleep was so imbued with risk and ritual, why did people ever allow themselves to be so vulnerable to it in the first place? As twilight deepens over the Nile, you begin to notice the quiet preparation that flows into the end of an Egyptian day. There is no mad scramble to switch off lights or shut down devices. There are none to shut. Instead, the rhythm of rest follows the fading of the sun, a slow, practiced descent into stillness. In the humble homes of farmers, potters, and scribes, this transition is marked by sound and scent. The last clay pot has been fired. Bread loaves are stored in sealed jars. The family cow is fed a final bundle of dried clover. A small oil lamp is lit not for reading or work, but simply to ease the body into the dim world of evening. The light flickers, golden and low, casting soft shadows that mimic the reeds swaying beyond the courtyard. Among the peasantry, evening meals were simple and early. A bowl of lentils, some leeks, flatbread occasionally, if the harvest or fishing had been favorable, grilled perch or dried figs. Wine, if it was available, was not saved for celebrations. It was often consumed in small amounts to aid digestion and just relaxation. A sleepy body did not argue with the night. As the household settles, a final washing might take place. Egyptians were famously clean daily. Washing was common, even among the poor. Feet were rinsed with water drawn from clay pots. Hands, arms, and face were wiped with damp linen. The more devout might offer a final incense burning, a symbolic gesture to cleanse the air before sleep. And then, with little fanfare, rest began. Not everyone slept through the night. In fact, like many ancient cultures, Egyptians likely practiced biphasic sleep, 2 stretches of sleep interrupted by a period of wakefulness. This watch, often occurring in the middle of the night, might last an hour or more. During this time, some offered prayers, others checked on animals, still others simply stared at the stars. It was not insomnia, it was a quiet intermission. In wealthier households, this intermission might involve quietly reviewing account ledgers or writing letters. Some aristocratic women used this time to freshen their kohl eyeliner or adjust wigs. Some men, particularly scribes, wrote poetry. A few, if troubled by dreams, would light incense and read from protective scrolls in the low lamplight, and then back to sleep. Among the priestly class, the rhythm of rest was even more precise. Temple workers, especially those assigned to the god Amen or Thoth-lived, by strictly segmented sleep routines. Their days were divided by ceremonial duties, many of which occurred at night. Incantations, water blessings, and maintenance of the god's statue all had to occur while others slept. These duties were rotated, meaning temple priests often slept in shifts. But their sleep was not neglected. was ritualized. They used special chamber school, dark, insulated with thick stone walls. These rooms were not large, but they were meticulously arranged. Straw mats lined with fine linen, headrests carved from acacia or ivory, jars of perfumed oil within reach. Some rooms had low benches for sitting meditations between rituals. These spaces were not only for sleep, but for attunement to stillness that mirrored the sacred order. It is, perhaps, in these temple practices that we find the Egyptian ideal of rest, most clearly defined not as indulgence, but as alignment. To sleep well was to reflect, the cosmic balance of all things. If one lived cleanly, worked honestly, honored the gods, and cared for family, sleep came easily. If it did not, the fault was not external. It was a signal, a nudge, a chance to reorient. So what happened when sleep never came? This brings us to the Egyptian understanding of disrupted sleep. Unlike modern insomnia, which is often treated as a clinical condition, ancient Egyptians saw sleeplessness as either a spiritual or digestive issue. Most commonly, it was thought to arise from improper eating, especially late-night onions or garlic, unspoken guilt, or emotional turmoil. Interference from the restless dead, the presence of bad air in the room. Each of these had its corresponding remedy. Doctors might prescribe myrrh dissolved in wine, or recommend sleep beneath a date palm. Spells might be chanted softly by a family matriarch, or a priest might bless the household doorway with water from the Nile's pure current, a designation reserved for spring floodwaters. In some cases, insomnia was even ritualized into art. There exist short poems found in tomb inscriptions and astraca fragments that reflect upon sleeplessness with a kind of resigned amusement. One fragment reads, "I have counted the stars and turned my side. The bed is cool, the house is quiet, but still I wonder. My dreams do not find me tonight." It is a universal moment, stretching across millennia. You can almost feel the breeze drifting through a lattice window, carrying the same restlessness you might feel in your own bedroom. But as dawn approaches, there is no panic, no rush. The body will rise when it's ready, and if sleep was uneven, the day will still go on. Egyptians, like most ancient peoples, knew that rest was a rhythm, not a metric. Some days you slept well. Some days the cat gods played tricks, which brings us, finally, to the afterlife where sleep took on its most permanent form. The deceased were not simply buried, they were placed at rest. Tomb inscriptions often refer to the dead as one who sleeps. An elaborate care was taken to ensure that their slumber was peaceful. Amulets were placed on the body, spells chanted over sarcophagi, and images of sleeping figures carved into tomb walls. Some mummies were even positioned with serene facial expressions and hands folded like a napping elder. In this eternal sleep, dreams were no longer feared, they were embraced. The afterlife was imagined as a perfect continuation of life, minus toil, minus conflictant, full of sunlit naps in shaded papyrus groves. And perhaps that is the quiet legacy of ancient Egyptian sleep. a vision of rest as something sacred, protected, and rhythmic. Not always easy, but always necessary. Even the gods slept, after all occasionally retreating into silence, or drifting across the heavens in boats of gold topped. So the next time you struggle to fall asleep, imagine the reed mat, the cool air, the headrest of carved wood, the incense smoke curling upward into the dark. And remember that even in a world full of crocodiles, gods, and sandstorms, people still found a way to rest. Matins in the dark, when the day begins, before the sun it's dark, very dark. The kind of darkness you can almost hear, and yet somewhere within the massive stone walls of a 10th century Benedictine monastery, tucked in the quiet hills of what is now central France, someone is moving, slowly, quietly, rubbing dry eyes, pulling rough wool around thin shoulders. It's time for Matinsy, the first service of the monastic day. The bell hasn't yet rung, but the expectation hums in the air. You, a monk living within the rule of Saint Benedict, have not overslept. In fact, oversleeping would be difficult. You went to bed not long after sunset, sometime around the 6th hour of the night. Now, a few hours later, likely between 2 and 3 a.m. you rise in the dark to begin your first spiritual labor. This is not a punishment. This is discipline. The life of a Benedictine monk is ordered by the divine office. 8 periods of prayer, spaced throughout the 24-hour day. Matins is the longest and earliest of these. Often, it is followed immediately by lauds. As dawn begins to creep over the cloisters, you can feel the cold stone beneath your bare feet. There are no candles in your cellet. There's a simple space, almost austere. A wooden bed frame, a straw mattress flattened from years of use, a thin woolen blanket, and perhaps a small crucifix carved from cherry wood. That's all. You slept in your robe. Changing clothes was reserved for feast days or laundry rotations. You move silently. Silence is not just preferred. Here it is ruled. Words, if spoken before lords, must be whispered. Most monks communicate, but with a silent language of gestures developed within the community. A raised eyebrow, a pointed finger, a small sign drawn in the air to say, "I will join you," even before sunrise. The rule teaches that speech should not disturb the soul. At this hour, the entire world is hushed. You emerge from your cell into the cloister, walk a square corridor surrounding a garden. On a clear night, stars are visible. Through the arched openings, the moon, if full, lights your way. The air is heavy with dampness and age. You smell cold stone, beeswax from earlier vespers, and the faint temps of old incense. You are not alone. Other monks file quietly out of their cells, forming a slow procession toward the church, the heart of the monastery. The only sound is the soft shuffle of sandals and the occasional sniffle from a brother nursing a Beethoven cold dog. Once inside the church, the group takes its place in the wooden choir stalls. These are her backed seats, carved with curious animal faces and symbolic motifs, lions, fish, vines, meant not to decorate, but to remind the mind to dwell on scripture. Each monk opens a psalter, worn at the corners from years of use. Some carry small wooden tablets with wax for note-taking or reflection. The service begins. Matins is long, perhaps an hour or more, and consists of psalms, canticles, readings from church fathers, and long passages of scripture. The chant is slow, steady, and mostly in Latin. It is not sung for entertainment. It is not emotional. It is meant to align your inner self with the rhythm of divine truth. The melodies follow ancient tones. No harmonies, no flourishes, just the quiet tide of communal recitation. The body begins to ache before the service ends. Kneeling on the stone floor, standing, sitting again. But you endure it not as a hardship, but as an act of sanctification. In this monastery, the day begins not with breakfast, not with conversation, but with the word. You are not your own. You are part of a body, a machine of devotion. By the time Lauds begins, the eastern sky is paling. The birds are beginning to stir. You have not yet eaten, nor spoken, nor stepped outside the church since you woke, but you are, in a strange way, fully awake. The world feels soft, like a breath held gently before the first true exhale. Eventually, Lauds concludes, and the monks file silently out of the church into the warming room, a rare luxury in medieval monasteries. Most of the year, the monastery is cold. Heat is expensive and labor-intensive, coming only from firewood gathered by lay brothers. In winter months, a small brazier burns here in the warming room, and you are allowed to stand near it for a few quiet moments. At last, there is a brief interlude before prime, the next office of the day. For a few monks, this is the only time for rest. A nap of perhaps 20 or 30 minutes, if you are quick. Others return to their cells to write or copy manuscripts by candlelight in the scriptorium. Before the next bell tolls, breakfast, if it can be called, that doesn't come until after terce, usually mid-morning. It consists of bread, sometimes dipped in thin ale or watered wine. On feast days, cheese or fruit. For the rest of the year, it is humble and functional. But food is not the reward. Sleep is not the reward. Prayer is both means and end. Still, your body grows tired. This is where the rule shows some mercy. Midday rest, especially in summer, is permitted. After the heavy meal following sext, monks are allowed a brief nap. This is the siesta, and even the rule of Saint Benedict acknowledges it. The monastic day is long and full, and rest is needed to sustain devotion. You return to your cell, close by your eyes, and sleep in full daylight. There are no dreams, usually just the soft darkness behind the eyes, and the feeling of wool on skin. But sleep, even when permitted, is a practice of moderation. The rule warns against luxurious sloth or overindulgence. Napping too long or dozing during reading could lead to penance. You must learn to rise when required, to sleep when allowed, and to treat both as forms of discipline. Still, even within this structure, monks found private moments. A quick breath of air under the cloistered arches, a glance at a bird in the garden, a small prayer whispered into the hay-filled pillow. Sleep, you come to understand, is never truly separated from faith. It is a reflection of order, a brief release into stillness, guarded by rule, and always interrupted by the next toll. Put of the bell. But what happens when the rhythm, in the great quiet of the cloister, when sleep evades, where the stone absorbs more than it echoes? Sleep is meant to be part of the rhythm, a minor note in the sacred harmony of the rule. But sometimes, even in this most regulated of lives, the human body resists. It turns in its straw mattress, listens to the wind outside the cell door, counts the chime of distant bells. The monastery is built for order, but the mind is not always so compliant. Monks, despite their vows, were not immune to restlessness. Illness, hunger, sorrow, or even too much wine during feast days could unbalance the fragile structure of sleep. And unlike the lay population outside the monastery walls, monks could not simply turn over and ignore the disruption. They were expected to notice it, to interpret it, and, if necessary, confess it. The rule of Saint Benedict offers gentle but clear warnings about sloth of the body and wandering of the mind. Falling asleep during the reading of sacred texts was considered a breach of focus. So too was overnapping or failing to rise promptly at the nocturnal bell. But what about its opposite? What about insomnia? Here, the line between sin and struggle blurred. Let us imagine you, a monk known for diligence, have not slept for 2 nights. You are not ill. You have made your evening prayers. You have eaten your sparse meal, and you have wrapped yourself in your robe with the intention to rest, and yet no sleep comes. Your mind churns. Words from the Psalms repeat. Thoughts of the coming harvest, of whether your penmanship has been deemed sloppy by the abbot, or of the young brother whose Latin chanting faltered at Matinzole roll through your consciousness. This kind of wakefulness was often attributed to temptation, not the dramatic kind, but a subtler one, acedia, sometimes translated as spiritual listlessness, was a deeply feared affliction in monastic life. It was a sort of inward slackness, a weariness of the soul, not sadness, exactly, not anger, but an unwillingness of the spirit to remain engaged in devotion. It was described by early Christian thinkers like Evagrius Ponticus as the noonday demon, that peculiar sense of lethargy and irritability that arrived, usually bright after lunch. A monk suffering from acedia might be restless at night and unfocused by day. He might sigh heavily during reading or glanced long out the window of the scriptorium. He might even shuffle to the chapel with slower feet than usual. And though this condition was often invisible, it was taken seriously. Remedies included increased prayer, manual labor, and sometimes most unexpectedly permission to rest more. A wise abbot knew when to allow a troubled monk a few hours in the infirmary, even if no physical illness presented. It was better to restore the rhythm than to punish the break. Some monasteries developed quiet practices for dealing with sleeplessness. A few of these seem strangely modern. You might walk the cloister slowly, barefoot, counting the paving stones. You might kneel in the chapel and recite the psalms aloud, not to be heard, but to distract the racing mind. You might read the lives of the desert fathers who famously endured sleeplessness as a form of spiritual trial, resting only once the body gave in from sheer fatigue. Some monks recorded dreams, or the lack of them on wax tablets kept in their cells. One anonymous entry from a 10th century monastery near Cluny reads, "I lay down to sleep, and my eyes did not close. I prayed and rose and prayed again. Toward morning, I dreamt of a fig tree bare of leaves. I will ask the abbot what this means." For others, sleeplessness was simply part of the vow. Life in a monastery was not built for comfort. It was built for structure, reflection, and purification. To lose sleep was not ideal, but it was also not unexpected. Like fasting, it was part of the monastic journey, a challenge to be met with humility. However, not all cases were stoically endured. Monks sometimes turned to herbal remedies grown within the monastery garden. These were not consumed lightly. Benedictine caution toward intoxication extended even to mild sedatives. But still, infusions of chamomile, valerian root, and poppy seed water were known and occasionally allowed, administered by a monk assigned to care for the sick. These remedies were recorded in simple Latin recipes: pro quiet somni, coax folia popaveris, cum aqua et mel, da ante compliterum, for quiet sleep. Boil poppy leaves with water and honey. Give before compline. These drinks were not strong. They calmed rather than dulled, and they were always accompanied by prayer. Yet, even with assistance, not all monks found rest easily. Some accepted this as a sign from God that their watchfulness was being refined, that they were being asked to listen more carefully to the silence of the night. And what silence it was! At 3 a.m. After matins, the monastery was neither asleep nor awake. A few monks might kneel in continued prayer. Others lay quietly, not sleeping, but resting. The night air pressed in through narrow windows. The scent of ink from the scriptorium lingered. A lone owl might cry out from a nearby pine. Some monks, particularly the older ones, described this time as the most intimate hour with God, not because it was filled with clarity, but because it was filled with nothing. No tasks, no singing, just breath, stone, memory, and the weight of devotion. But what about the structure of the day that followed? Could a monk truly function with so little sleep? How did the monastery adjust to the body's needs without betraying its sacred schedule? It is now late afternoon, and the monastery is quiet, in a way only places governed by order can be on earned stillness. Like the gentle calm after a long chant, you, a Benedictine monk of the 10th century, have moved through most of the divine office, matins in the dark, lauds at dawn, prime with its brief readings, and then the middle day services, terce, sext, and now none. each marked by chanted psalms and punctuated by slow movement through the stone corridors of your monastic home. But behind this strict schedule, one truth pulses quietly beneath the surface. Sleep has not come easily today, nor did it yesterday. And yet, life here continues, seemingly without disruption. That's the quiet genius of Benedictine design. The rule of Saint Benedict did not demand superhuman stamina, it required predictability. In return, it offered a kind of physiological mercy that is only just beginning to be recognized in the modern world. You see, medieval monastic sleep was not like ours. It followed a pattern that modern researchers have only recently come to appreciate: segmented sleep. Before the widespread use of artificial lighting, most people, including monks, slept in two distinct phases. The first sleep began after Compline, the final office of the day, often occurring just after sunset. Monks would go to bed around 7 or 8 p.m., rising again at 2 or 3 a.m. For Matins, this first sleep was deep and often dream-filled. But after Matins, instead of resuming the day, monks would either stay awake in quiet meditation or, if permitted, return to bed for a second sleep, lasting until just before prime. These periods of segmented sleep allowed the body to rest deeply and then engage in light activity or spiritual contemplation before resuming rest. Far from being disruptive, it was often experienced as a time of clarity and calm. You might find yourself sitting in your cell after matins, not anxious about being awake, but rather absorbed in quiet reading. Or perhaps, as some monks did, you return to sleep immediately, your body still heavy with the first cycle's drowsiness. The rule didn't spell this pattern out, it didn't need to. Monks lived in a world that flowed with the seasons, dimmed with dusk, and woke with birdsong. Their bodies, like yours, learned to adapt naturally to the rhythm of bells and shadows. Still, the rule did make small allowances. During summer, when the days were longer, monks could sleep slightly more. During winter, a longer time was allocated for reading by lamplight in the dormitory before bed. These subtle adjustments mirrored the sun's arc, not the rigid clocks of later centuries. There was even a practice called Collatio, a quiet period after Compline, when monks might gather in the cloister or refectory and listen to readings, especially from the Collations of John Cassian, a text rich with wisdom from the early Desert Fathers. Tit was named not only for the text, but also for the gentle sharing of thoughts it sometimes inspired. Not conversations, exactly, but murmured reflections, silent nods, and the companionship of presence before bed. In the dormitory, monks slept in rows each, in a small cot, separated by simple partitions. The silence was deep, broken only by the occasional cough, rustle of blankets, or very rarely a whispered Hail Mary offered by someone whose sleep resisted return. Infirmary monks, those who were old or ill, might be permitted to sleep outside. Of these scheduled times, their cells were warmer, their schedules less exacting. They offered a kind of living reminder that the rule bent when necessary, to human need. And if sleep still refused to come, then one might ask for spiritual counsel. Not punishment, not shame, just guidance. The abbot might recommend longer reading of the Psalms. The infirmarian might prepare a fellow monk might sit beside you for a short while, offering his silent company as comfort. Over time, sleep would return. Slowly, steadily, the body would readjust to the rhythm. You would rise for matins, no longer in dread, but in quiet anticipation. Darkness, no longer a burden, but a space where the divine might be heard more clearly. And then there was the garden. Monasteries nearly always had gardens, not just for food, but for peace. Some included small alcoves for meditation, bordered by lavender or sage. Here, if a monk sought solitude after a sleepless night, he might sit before none and watch the bees, or run his hands over the thyme, or simply observe the slow movement, pull off clouds beyond the cloister roof. The garden reminded monks that growth takes time, and that sleep, like sunlight, comes in seasons. By the time Vespers arrived, late afternoon, with its golden chants, you might still feel the weight of fatigue in your limbs, but you would also feel the subtle reward of endurance. You had kept the rhythm. You had not broken the day, even if sleep had broken its hold on you. When Compline came at last, ushering in night with soft psalms and dimmed lamps, you would kneel once more with your brothers. The words of the final hymn would rise softly, in manus tuas Domine, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. And whether you slept easily or not at all, you would lie down, knowing that this too was part of the pattern that even wakefulness could be a form of prayer. Sleep would come again. It always did. But what about the world outside the monastery? How did common villagers sleep? And did they envy the order behind a merchant's evening in Chang'an? Sun has long since dipped behind the western gates of Chang'an, the glittering capital of the Tang Dynasty, and the city begins to exhale. You walk through the south market, where, even after sunset, stalls flicker with oil lamps, and the scent of sesame smoke hangs like a curtain between storefronts in the wealthier quarters. The night is not feared. It is a time of poetry, tea, and rest. But rest is not immediate. In this city home to over 1 million souls, a swirling mix of Persians, Sogdians, Turks, and Han Chinese, it begins slowly. And for some, the journey to sleep starts not in bed, but in a TEHOUSE. You are a middle-ranking cloth merchant, dealing in bolts of patterned silk imported from Khotan. And tonight, like many others, you step by the pavilion of warm fragrance, modest but clean establishment tucked near the Willow Gate. It is here that Sleep's long overture begins. Inside, the air is thick with the steam of boiled chrysanthemum, goji berries, and ginger root. Patrons sit on low stools or lie on woven mats as attendants quietly refill glazed ceramic cups. Conversation is soft, measured, often whispered. A zither player in the far corner plucks gentle notes that ripple across the room like drifting clouds. thoughts. You feel your breathing slow before you've even taken a sip. Here, tea is not simply for wakefulness. Some blends are made specifically for slumber. Recipes vary, but you notice that your usual cup includes lotus seed, believed to calm the heart, jujube fruit, rich, sweet, and soothing, silk tree bark, not from the same tree that makes your trade goods, but prized for its calming properties. This is not medicine. It's not ceremony either. It is daily life in the Tang capital, where tea had become so embedded into culture that it blurred the lines between beverage, ritual, and pharmacology. You might not even know why this tea helps you sleep. Simply does. Your grandmother drank it. Your children now do. This nightly ritual, so subtle and mundane, reflects something deeper. The sophistication of Tang China's relationship with rest. Sleep was not merely the absence of activity. It was a cultivated state, achieved through careful staging light, warmth, digestion, and sound. Once your tea is finished, you step back into the night. Lanterns sway gently from wooden beams overhead. A soft rustle of silk robes brushes past as another merchant, perhaps a spice dealer, nods at you in passing. The street is quiet, but not dead. Chang'an never fully sleeps. There are night couriers, candle makers finishing their work, poets sitting near the Anshan Canal, composing verses they'll later forget. You reach your home, a modest townhouse in the southeastern quarter. Inside, your wife is preparing the bed, a lacquered wooden platform overlaid with bamboo matting for the summer heat. Above it, a gauze mosquito net, woven in loops and scented faintly with sandalwood. She has already lit a sleep lamp, a small ceramic bowl with a floating wick in sesame oil, which gives just enough light to navigate the room, but not enough to read. By dot, tonight is warm, so there will be no brazier. But in colder months, she might warm a ceramic sleep pot with embers and slip it beneath the bed frame, wrapped in cloth to avoid burns. The bedroom is not entirely private. You share a wall with your neighbor, and voices sometimes filter through. But there's a rhythm to it, a predictable murmur of bowls being stacked, water being drawn. You feel a curious comfort in it, knowing your neighbors are settling in for the night to dot before bed. You perform a light rub-down with fragrant balmer, mixture of camphor and cinnamon oil. This was recommended to you by a physician at the herbal hall near the East Market, who told you it encourages the spirit to descend. Your wife braids her hair loosely for sleep, tucks the corners of the bed net, and the two of you lie down side by side. There is no expectation of immediate sleep. As was common in the Tang elite and artisan classes, people often lay wakeful for a time, chatting, whispering verses, or simply digesting the day. Above you, an oil paper window filters in the glow. Pooh of a neighbor's lamp softened through bamboo slats. Eventually, silence settles. In Chang'an, people did not always sleep through the night. Like the monks in faraway European cloisters, city dwellers often woke in the middle hours between what they called the first sleep and the second rest. But this was not considered insomnia. It was a natural pause, often used for prayer, for checking on infants, or, in some households, for writing. A Thames poet named by Dewey once wrote, "In the middle of the night, I rise and step barefoot to the balcony. The moonlight fills my robe with silver, and the stars seem to wait for a thought I have not yet formed. Tonight you do not rise, but you feel a stillness similar to what by Dewey described the city dimmed, the world simplified, your breath in slow conversation with the darkness. Yet you can't help but wonder, how did peasants in the countryside, those without tea houses, silk pillows, or fragrant oils, prepare for sleep? Let us leave behind the zither's fading melody and the jasmine steam of Changan St. pavilions. You are no longer a merchant in the capital. Instead, you are a farmer, more precisely, a tenant tilling land in the lush river-woven valleys of Sichuan, a province dotted with rice paddies, low hills, and thick bamboo groves. Here, the nights are dark in a way that would astonish city dwellers. After dusk, aside from cooking fires or a flickering lantern in a shrine, there is almost total darkness. No paper lanterns hung from taverns, no light from second-story rooms, no background murmur of poetry or trade. Sleep here is different in texture, but not necessarily worse. Like your urban cousins, you follow the rhythms of the seasons and sun, but while they ease into slumber with tea blends and perfumed bombs, your road to rest is carved through physical exhaustion. Your day begins with the cock's first crow, sometime in the thick dark before dawn. You rise with an aching back, often before your body is ready, and work the earth until the sun is low, and your knees no longer respond willingly to commands. Sleep, when it comes like a stone dropped into a still Ponsuden, heavy and final. You share a small thatched home with your wife, 2 children, and a grandmother whose legs no longer allow her to join the harvest. At night you lie by on a straw mat filled with rice husks, covered by a single woven hemp cloth. Your pillow is a wooden cylinder rounded, lacquered, and sometimes filled with herbs or rice to stay cool. These pillows, though hard by modern standards, were believed to balance the ki, and their consistent use shaped the sleeping postures of the entire region. The family sleeps together in the same room, sometimes even on the same mat in winter. Privacy is not a luxury you possess, but the closeness brings warmth, both literal and emotional. Children curl into their elders, and the grandmother's humming sometimes lingers even after she falls asleep. What of sleep aids you cannot afford, lotus seeds or silk tree bark? But the countryside has its own traditions. The village herbalist, an old man who wears a tunic stained with bitterroot and turmeric, often brews simple remedies for the sleepless. One such mixture includes licorice root for the stomach, swan, zhao ren, sour jujube seed, believed to calm the liver, mulberry leaves for cooling and clarity. He sells these in small sachets to be boiled and taken before bed. Most people don't buy them unless they've had a restless week, perhaps after a family funeral, a failed crop, or a child's unexplained fever. Ritual also plays a quiet role. Before sleep, many families offer a short incense prayer at the ancestral shrine in the corner of the room. They bow 3 times, light a stick of sandalwood incense, and thank their forebears for protection and peace. For some, this nightly gesture is the final exhale of the day, a slow unclenching of the mind. And if sleep won't come, the options are few. You might chew on dried plum bark or sit outside on the porch, listening to the frogs in the irrigation ditches. The stars above you are sharp and vast. In this world without city glow, the Milky Way seems close enough to walk into. Some nights, neighbors share their wakefulness. A widow next door might murmur a folk song. An elderly uncle might recite the same poem he's remembered since his scholar days, repeating it slowly like a lullaby for himself. The lamp flickers twice in the wind, but sleep comes not. Only the shadow of plum blossoms on the wall. Yet this is not seen as suffering. Wakefulness, in these dark hours, becomes a space to feel small things again. A bamboo shoot creaking in wind, the smell of roasted barley still clinging to your sleeve. Your bed is not comfortable by courtly standards. Your night clothes are the same ones you wore during supper. But there's a different kind of wealth. Here, the certainty of rest earned by labor, and the safety of familiar sounds, the breathing of your children, the hush of straw, the steady drip of water off the eaves. Sleep arrives not all at once, but gradually, first in the heaviness of the limbs, then in the quiet folding of thoughts into dreams, and finally in the full silence of surrender, when even the frogs fall quiet, and the village becomes a single breathing thing. Still, one wonders, how did imperial scholars and court officials, burdened with exams, scrolls, and political intrigue, find sleep amidst the weight of the empire? Now, imagine you are in Luoyang, the eastern capital of the Tang Dynasty, and it is a rare moonless night. The city sleeps, but within the candlelit rooms of the Ministry of Rites, a man stares at a pile of bamboo slips and sighs quietly. He is a junior court official, recently appointed after years of preparation for the imperial examinations, and he has not slept well in several months. Despite what romantic scroll paintings might show, life among the temps literati is not always serene. Sleep, for men like this one, is often elusive, not for lack of comfort, but because of mental burden. The Temps dynasty's bureaucracy was as sprawling as it was intricate. Officials were expected to memorize thousands of characters, cite ancient legal precedents, interpret celestial omens, and compose poetry, all with a sense of effortless grace. Beneath their robes and refined manners, many of them were chronically anxious, and insomnia, though not often named as such, was quietly widespread. This man called him when lives in a modest apartment near the administrative compound. His bedding is superior to the farmer's straw mat or the merchant's bamboo pallet. His bed frame is rosewood, slightly raised and carved with stylized clouds. He has access to fine linens, which are refreshed monthly, and a small ceramic sleep pot is tucked beneath his quilt, still radiating warmth from its charcoal core. He has also been gifted a moon pillow, circular bolster filled with lavender, pole and mulberry husk by his mother, who now lives far away in the southern hills. She enclosed a note reminding him to sleep more and think less. But when finds sleep evasive tonight, he has spent the day reviewing provincial census rolls. Before that, he proofread an astronomical report predicting an eclipse. And before lunch, he wrote a 30-line poem on the virtues of virtue. None of it has settled. His mind ticks through court appointments, the ambitions of rival officials, and whether his metaphor in the poem was too strained, in search of relief. He walks to his private study lit dimly by a single wick lampstand, opens a lacquered cabinet. Inside is a sleep scroller, kind of loose compendium, compiled by a Confucian physician who believed insomnia was best addressed through poetry, ritual, and mild dietetics. The scroll suggests the following before bed: brew a light soup of mung beans and dried chrysanthemum. Do not eat pickled cabbage after sundown. Avoid dreaming of tigers by reciting a passage from the Book of Changes. Bathe the feet in salted ginger water to redirect excess fire from the liver dot. When follows some of these instructions faithfully, he has also learned to perform a short qigong routine, standing barefoot on his balcony, slowly moving his arms like cranes in flight. This, too, is meant to draw tension out of the chest and restore inner stillness. And still, sleep does not come easily. In this, when is not alone. Many scholars of the Temps elite wrestled with their own version of sleeplessness. The famous poet Li Bai once wrote, "I drink to forget the hour, but the moon, so nosy, wakes me again." Others, like Han Yu, developed more structured nightly routines, including cold baths, elaborate inkstone cleaning rituals, and recitations of Buddhist sutras. In fact, Buddhism played a curious role in the Tang relationship to sleep. While the monastic ideal discouraged indulgence in sleep, Buddhist monks often slept sitting upright or on hard planks to avoid sloth. Many officials borrowed from its teachings. When, for instance, has been advised to meditate before bed, focusing on the breath until his thoughts untangle like fish escaping a net. But more often than not, he simply waits. In the second hour of the night, what we might call around 11 p.m., he finally begins to doze. But he knows that this is only the first sleep. At some point, usually near the hour of the ox, he will awaken again, perhaps write a few lines of poetry, sip some cold tea, and return to bed for his second rest. This Bephosic sleep pattern was common among the Temps elite. The hours between were often seen as introspective time, a gift, not a curse. If Wen's dreams were disturbed, he might consult his dream dictionary, a cloth-bound text that interprets symbols. Dreaming of cranes, good omen. Dreaming of broken shoes, danger. By dawn, when rises somewhat rested, never fully refreshed and prepares to face the day's memoranda, He eats warm rice porridge with sesame, puts on his blue court robes, and tucks a small poem into his sleeve in case he's called upon to recite during court proceedings. The cycle begins again, from farmer to merchant to minister. The Tang Dynasty cultivated a diverse and textured understanding of sleep. Some approached it with simple surrender, others with anxious ritual, but all saw it as a daily negotiation with the body and the world, a quiet echo of the same order they sought in waking life. Still, one wonders, how did people outside the Chinese Empire, perhaps traders or travelers along the Silk Road, understand and prepare for sleep while far from home?